Okay, welcome everybody to the strange and unique experience of a hybrid conference where we're trying to integrate remote and local participants. So we have been working on the issue of AI governance for some time. Some of you may remember the term internet governance, which is the name of our project. And essentially, we have pretty much figured out that what we're really dealing with is the governance of information and communications technology. Generally, AI is just an extension of that, but it does pose some unique issues. So we are coming to you from the newly renovated building of the Carter School of Public Policy in Atlanta, Georgia, in the US. And we've chosen to focus on the global political economy aspects of AI, in particular issues such as who controls the data that is used to train models and what are the rights and property rights and privileges of people to do that. How do export controls on the key elements of information technology affect developing countries and generally the economy, the digital economy. And we also will be introducing a special issue of the Journal of Cyber Policy, which contains papers. And for those of you who are here, there are copies of those papers out there in the lobby. So we're going to start with an overview of the topic from a distinguished scholar who has written about governance of both the internet and AI many years. That's Viktor Mayer-Schönberger. So welcome, Viktor. We're happy to see you. And it's time for you to give your keynote.
Thank you very much, Milton. Hello, everybody, and good morning to Atlanta. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about AI governance. In particular, also because I'm too old, my professorship is still called Professor of Internet Governance and Regulation. So I think we need to update that very soon and make it the Professorship of AI Governance. Now, with that being said, I'd like to talk about the landscape of AI regulation and AI governance briefly before we delve into a panel discussion, hopefully a spirited one. I will try my best to do that. When we look at AI governance, there is a meme on the internet going around that AI governance is really about three different versions of governance represented by three different jurisdictions or three different geographic blocks. The United States, Europe, and Asia, or very often China. And then it starts into a geopolitical conversation about grand powers and how the rest of the world will align. I'm trying in my 15 to 20 minutes to stay away from such an international relations or pure international relations approach that seems to me a little bit simplistic and a little lacking in nuance, because there is more going on. First, I think there is more than just three governance models, although three is something that we as humans can comprehend mentally easily. So I stick to picking three examples of governance, but I want to begin by saying there are more than three, even though we'll probably look at three quite archetypical ones. Second, these governance models or these governance structures are not necessarily limited to one particular geography. We see them emerge in different versions, in different nuances around the world in different jurisdictions at different times. This is a time where nothing is settled, where there is a lot of different competing governance models that crop up. there is some coordination, but then coordination breaks up again. And there is a little bit of learning going on. I'll talk a little more about that towards the end of it. Of course, the context for today's talk and today's workshop really is the upcoming Indian World AI Summit. We had the World Summit and the world came together in Paris for the AI Summit. That was important, an important moment in time. Now it's India's important moment coming up, and the world will look at India and will look at the topic of AI governance. The first, of course, of these governance models that I'm going to mention today is the one that sees the need for AI governance as one to rein in and limit and constrain biases and discrimination of AI models. The idea is that AI models distort reality, much like a bad mirror distorts reality, and therefore decisions, suggestions, or in fact even decisions made by the AI model will reflect that distortion. These biases, this discrimination vis-a-vis certain groups or certain individuals in the population. And there are multiple examples given from hiring biases by AI systems to mortgage and lending and loan biases, all the way to perhaps more troubling and severe biases in policing that have been found to be prevalent. The governance model, therefore, is one where we look at the problem of AI decision-making vis-a-vis individuals. We see the distortion that is happening, and we want that distortion to stop. The fear that a lot of the advocates of this governance model have is that, in fact, the human individuals, as well as humanity as a whole, perhaps societies, are losing their agency. They become puppets on the string of AI. Whatever AI suggests, people do, even though it means fundamentally that they will be discriminated against because they don't know better, because the system is not transparent enough, doesn't explain, because the data underlying the system that it was trained with was faulty or skewed or problematic in the first place. So the big threat, if you want, philosophical threat is a lack of agency. And the idea is, of course, that this could be overcome by basically governance and policy measures that change the way the technology works. For example, by making the technology more transparent, letting it or tweaking it so that it can explain why it reached a certain conclusion, making it more, making the weights, the data that goes into it, the tweaking and training more explicit and more transparent. The hope is that with the sunlight of transparency and the scrutiny on the data, we will create AI systems that are responsible, fair, and undiscriminating. And that is the task of AI governance. Now, this approach has a very strong moral foundation, a very strong foundation in individual rights. And not surprisingly, we find a great many representatives of this approach, particularly in Europe, were sort of the sense that individual rights and fairness is crucially important, has perhaps stronger currency than in other parts of the world. It's also full of moral conviction. although it's somewhat unclear on the means side, on the technology and policy side, whether the policy interventions that are being suggested would really lead to this kind of fair and undiscriminating outcome. But this is really a governance model focused on the individual, focused on discrimination and bias and the avoidance of that. There is another model, and this model really is looking at the governance challenge as one that we have been familiar with for 2 decades or more, a challenge of economic power and economic might, suggesting that what we see is really large players becoming larger and larger and more powerful, that there is a significant concentration thanks to how AI works in the marketplace. And what we already saw in internet economics and e-commerce and so forth is now happening in the AI field as well, except it's on steroids there. Of course, because the very best models are the ones that are being trained with at least currently, with the highest, largest amount of data and the highest processing power. And processing power and data volume is, of course, available mostly to the very large players, which means that the very large players have the best models. And that means that a lot of the people, a lot of the users will coalesce, will concentrate around these very small number of large players. This means that what we lack is competition. What we lack is choice, particularly consumer choice. But there is actually even more at play. The advocates of this particular model suggest there is at play that we may lose innovation and equally importantly, that we may give up on resilience because we discover that the models that we're using, the handful of models, are all coming from the very large players that all use basically the same kind of data and very similar algorithmic setup. And that means that we have systems that are not very different from each other, fundamentally quite similar, creating a homogeneity of supply of AI models. It's a little bit like the consumers realize that they are sitting in a car and everybody else is sitting in a similar car. So if the handbrake breaks in their car, the brake may go bust in all other cars as well, and we have a single point of failure or similar points of failure in the handful of models that prevail. That, of course, has huge repercussions and consequences for resilience, for cybersecurity, for the safety of systems, for the reliability of the decisions that we derive from such AI systems. And so the argument, therefore, is what we really need is competition. We need choice, choice in the marketplace, choice for consumers that also is then reflected in multitudes of providers and a diversity of providers, large and small, not only to keep innovation going, but also to ensure that resilience is there at the level of the providers. There is so this is a rather, if you want, economic argument that drives this particular governance debate or take. And then there is a third one, perhaps more recently suggested, and that is one that focuses in the governance debate on the moment of decision making and who makes the decisions and how are these decisions made. And the argument there is, or the threat is, that in fact, if we have AI models that are being trained with data from the past, all that we get is decision suggestions that are, in fact, like a movie projector, projecting the past to help us make decisions in the present or in the future. That is fundamentally conservative and backward looking, and undermines not just our ability, again, to innovate, but our ability to really go beyond what already is there, and to construct a world that is not yet reality, but could be, which of course is one of the foundations of human progress, that we can imagine a different world and then make that different world happen. If we use AI that's trained on past data, on training data from the past, all that we are perpetuating, so the fear goes, is the past, rather than enabling us to adapt to a different future and to make that future happen. And then, of course, the suggested answer is to ensure that we have lots of decision options still available, that we have the agency to decide, but not just the agency to decide and to confirm the AI suggestion, but to really use our human agency and our human capability to imagine a world that doesn't exist, to increase the option space that's available. So these are the three archetypical governance debates or governance approaches that I see. There are certainly many more, but what we see happening is all around the world, the jurisdictions seem to pick one or more of those and try to implement some policy there. Now, some jurisdictions are really going fast. They are implementing policies very quickly. Some jurisdictions like the European Union have already done so with the AI Act that you might be familiar with. That's on the one hand laudable, but on the other hand, of course, it could mean if we don't really know how the technology develops, that we build something that will not be needed, much like a bridge going into nowhere, because we identified a threat that turned out to be not the real threat, and we are building a policy framework for the wrong policy goal. Now, those that criticize the fast approach suggest that we should wait, but waiting in itself is not a good strategy either, because if we wait for too long, in fact, we may end up being in a situation that we cannot change anymore, that has solidified so significantly that even strong policy interventions will not be able to change the trajectory of the use of AI or the use of any given technology. So it seems to me that we are between a rock and a hard place, between going too early and therefore missing the real aim, or waiting for too long and therefore overlooking or having the window of opportunity pass by without us acting. What I suggest we might do as we are pondering this conundrum is really to think about design principles, to think about whatever regulatory and policy approach we are taking. What do we want to achieve, perhaps, if you want, on the meta level? And my first point in this particular context is to suggest that whatever policy we are taking, we need to make sure that it is adaptive and flexible, because whatever policy we're adapting is flexible and adaptive, because we don't know the exact trajectory of AI technology. And so we will err. The problem is not that we err. The problem is if we don't do anything after we have erred. We therefore need institutions and processes to revise policy, to adapt and be flexible. That, of course, is asking a lot, and I know that. The point for me is, with the design principles, to think of something that is flexible rather than rigid, more like a rope that helps you when you climb a mountain, rather than some strict policy that's like a strict rail on the side of the road. What would these such design principles, as I suggested, for such flexible policy measures be? What could they be? Well, the first one, it seems to me, is that we have to focus on human agency for a number of reasons, not the least because we have the ability as humans to imagine, as I mentioned, a world that doesn't exist, but could. And therefore, if we give up on our own agency and delegate everything to AI, we lose the ability to shape reality and to shape the world in which we live. The second design principle that I already mentioned or alluded to at the beginning is that as we need the flexibility and adaptability, we need policy design that's learning enough, that understands when policy works and when it doesn't, and is able to adjust. That is hard to do. We have not had a lot of positive experiences in institutions and processes to do that. It's a hard challenge, but nevertheless one that we might want to look at. And of course, we want to create options for our decision-making, increase the option space, which is important to us. My final design principle is one of self-restraint, because I think that we know too little. And the European Union's AI Act experience in practice shows us that even after a few months of its being in force, the European Union is already considering adapting and adopting it and changing it quite significantly, in part because the world changed, in part because some of the things that the AI Act contains didn't work out the way it was suggested. So we need to be humble as we approach AI governance. We need to learn from each other. We need to be in a dialogue. That is why it is so fundamentally important to have the AI summit and to engage in this conversation with each other so that we can learn from each other, because our mind, our human mind, is flexible enough so that we can begin to invent and think about institutions, governance and policy institutions and processes that could be more flexible and adaptive and meet the challenge of AI and AI policy. That at least is my hope. Thanks very much.
Questions and comments, or we going to the next panel?
We can take questions.
Yeah, we can take a few questions. Peter.
Hi, Victor. Peter Swire here. Good to see you.
Peter, good to see you.
The first part you talked about was the bias discrimination trend around individual rights. And as I've been reading things in the last several months, it seems to me that's turning into another related concept that's familiar from our earlier debates, which is basically a surveillance capitalism concern, which is that instead of it being biased so that groups get treated differently, there'll be such personalization by the AI chatbot that knows so much about you that agency gets lost because of the manipulation by the algorithm from the AI provider. And the Eurasia Group annual report has a pretty detailed discussion of this that I think is informative. So I'm just curious, have you observed this also, and how do you see this surveillance capitalism manipulation critique the same or different from your bias discrimination first branch?
Thank you, Peter. It seems to me that this bias and discrimination debate is a little bit like a red herring. That's my personal view, because oftentimes people seem to be surprised that the model discriminates when in fact it's been trained on data that reflects discriminatory practices in the past. And so what the AI model then does is, in fact, shows us the mirror image of our flawed past human decision-making. And that is important, in fact, because that is something we can remedy. The beauty of AI models is that we can change weights, we can shift and train the model in a particular way so that it is not necessarily as discriminatory as our past decisions were. In that sense, it's also AI models can be a useful detection device for discrimination. Now, with respect to surveillance, and we both come from the privacy background, my sense is that surveillance or privacy is such a complex phenomenon of different strands and different rights that oftentimes we just throw a label at it, like surveillance or so, when in fact it's more helpful to tease things out and to look more closely at what we're worried about. Are we worried about wrong decision making? Are we worried about sort of badges of inferiority or labeling of groups and individuals of people? Are we worried about a particular economic system, like Shoshana Zuboff did in Surveillance Capitalism? And it seems to me that we would actually benefit from teasing out these debates a little further. But you have been doing such excellent work in the privacy field, and yet we all have failed in advancing the privacy debate. Sometimes 25 years on, I feel like it's Groundhog Day, and we are still throwing everything under the sort of under the banner of privacy or surveillance. So my suggestion would be to really look closely and try to tease out what are we worried about, and then try to find a policy solution that is narrowly tailored to our worry.
Okay, we have one question from the audience that I wanted to take. Viktor, in the interest of time, we have two questions, but are you able to see the question in the chat, or do you want me to read it out loud?
Hold on, just need to take my glasses off.
I will read it out loud. So this is Marilia from Diplo Foundation. She's asking, under which archetypical AI governance model would you place the United States, considering the state-first mercantilist approach they have adopted with regards to digital tech, making AI a pillar of national economic security? That's question number one. If you want to take the other one, what kind of governance approach is being adopted by AI companies which make de facto rules for AI with their business decisions?
Mm-hmm. And the answer is, first of all, thank you for the question. The answer is all of the above, in a way. That's the crazy moment. When we look at the US, on the one hand, on the federal level, it seems like everything goes, and as long as the tech giants are happy and provide enough money to the coffers of the White House, we are going to be fine. On the other hand, on the state level, we have quite detailed approaches in some states, on fairness, on anti-discrimination, even on decision agency and decision-making, human decision-making. And we see some of it on the in the AI companies as well. Some AI companies say, we really need to keep on trying, and others say, and we will have fairness and anti-discrimination tools in place. Others suggest that what we really need is a more robust marketplace. Ask the people at DeepSeek, and they surely will tell you that the oligopoly in the United States is troublesome. Or take one step further and ask people at Anthropic and others what they really aim to do, and they will tell you that they want to really empower agency and decision making. The problem for us is that the debate isn't so one-sided and so simplistic, that at different times and at different levels, in almost every jurisdiction, you have different goals surfacing. And that makes it so hard to come up with a comprehensive AI Act. And at the end, if you do one, you create a very large piece of legislative action that seems to cover the waterfront, but at the end becomes quite ineffective. Just ask the European Commission about how it sees the AI Act.
Okay, thank you, Victor. We're going to move to our second panel with Dr. Mueller and Joyce Hakmeh from Chatham House.
Thank you, Kareem. Thank you, Milton and Victor. And it's great to be with you, albeit online. So I'm Joyce Hakmeh. I'm the Deputy Director of the International Security Program here at Chatham House. And today I'm participating in my capacity as the editor of the Journal of Cyber Policy after a successful collaboration with Milton and his team on a special issue looking at AI governance. But for those who don't know the journal, I know there are some authors or previous authors of the journal amongst the participants, so it's great to see you. The journal is published by Taylor and Francis and edited by Chatham House. It's a peer-reviewed journal publishing 3 times a year, focusing on cyber and tech policy issues more generally. And one of the main aims of the journal is to really bridge the gap between the people who create the technology, people who govern the technology, people who research the technology, and try and make sense of all these developments and what they mean. So why were we interested in this special issue, and why this collaboration? The journal, for those who follow it, has been increasingly focusing on how emerging technologies intersect with geopolitics, regulation, market power, and public policy. And of course, you know, for all of us in the room, we know how much AI now is very much at the core of national security strategies, competition policy, platform regulation, digital trade, making it impossible to just look at it as just a narrow technical field. And we've seen the recent developments that Victor talked about, from the EU AI Act, but also to export controls, global debates around foundational models, and so on, have underscored that AI governance is no longer prospective, but actually reshaping the global digital order. So we really were hoping in this special issue to move beyond the hype and examine some of the concrete political, economic, and institutional dynamics that now structure AI systems and the regulation. And more generally at Chatham House, we've been working on AI, trying to really understand the significance of all these developments. We have an ongoing collaboration with the Howard Baker Forum, who created the AI Collaborative, which actually tries and look at all these developments and their significance to industry, especially the ones operating across jurisdictions. In this special issue, we've covered a diverse range of topics, from looking at the hype of AGI, which Milton will talk about, to exploring practical approaches to regulating AI as part of broader digital ecosystems, and Victor talked about that. It also addresses the rise of soft law and voluntary standards as flexible tools for governance, the growing enclosure of data in generative AI and its consequences for market competition, and the geopolitical strategies shaping access to AI infrastructure and compute power. And across these contributions, the issue emphasizes that AI governance, that's kind of like one of the main threads, is less about abstract scenarios and more about the real world institutions, infrastructures, and market dynamics that are actively reshaping policy, industry, and international relations today. So the issue will be out in the next a few weeks. Please stay tuned. And in this panel, we have two of the authors. We've heard from Viktor, who talked to us about those three different models. And if you want to read more about that, please, I'll definitely advise you to read his commentary in the issue entitled Of Forests and Trees in AI Governance. But we also have an article from Milton that looks at sort of the AGI and the illusion that distorts and distracts digital governance. So we thought what we could do in this panel is maybe go through some of the basically arguments that have been put forward by this paper, and just have a bit of a discussion before turn it back to you for the rest of this workshop today. So Milton, I wonder whether either you want to give a little bit of background as to how this collection of papers came together, or if you'd prefer go straight into the article. Over to you.
All right, thanks, Joyce. And yes, a bit about it. We did have a workshop last year about AI governance, and that's where we most of these papers came from, including Viktor's, Brenden's, and mine. And I will go then straight into the AGI thing, because I really think that this prospect of an artificial general intelligence, or sometimes called a super intelligence, is really what got the whole governance of AI issue off on the wrong foot in a very important way. So the first thing that it did was, of course, created a sense of panic. The AI developers, many of them very distinguished computer scientists and software developers for AI, essentially convinced themselves that they were Robert Oppenheimer, and they were creating this gigantic, dangerous weapon. They were unleashing these massive forces that would, in fact, could destroy humanity. In fact, their argument is sort of worse than the atomic bomb argument, in the sense that when we talk about the atomic bomb destroying humanity, everybody understands that it would be decisions by humans in a war that would unleash this destructive power. But the AGI argument was that the technology itself would grow into an autonomous being, and it would make the decision to destroy us. So it completely absolves humanity of any agency and any responsibility for what happens with this technology. So the first thing I do in this paper is I examine, what do we mean by general intelligence that is artificial? And I discovered a vacuum. I won't go into detail into the argument, but essentially there is no threshold by which we know we have created an AGI. There is no such thing as a general machine intelligence. That is, we create machines that calculate and make decisions about specific things and do specific kinds of operations. But the idea that not only would this do anything that without any kind of direction or programming, but that it would not only that it would be all powerful and autonomous. We try to trace through the computer science research on that and discover, again, kind of a vacuum and a lot of anthropomorphism. The whole argument about alignment is misalignment is about where you are trying to train a machine to do something, and it sort of either does what's called reward hacking, and that means that it creates a way to nominally fulfill what you told it to do, but it doesn't really. And a famous example is the machine learned that it could win this boat race game, not by outpacing all the other boats, but by just going around in circles. And something about the structure of the game was that it got more points doing that than it did by actually winning the race. So that's an example of kind of misalignment in an AI. And so the AI doomers, as I like to call them, essentially believe that this kind of misalignment would build up and nobody would notice. Nobody could correct it to the point where the machine became, again, this autonomous and all-powerful thing. So we do have copies of the paper here printed out. It is open access, thanks to the journal for that. And you can go into more detail on these arguments. I would note that we tried very hard in our conference to get somebody who believed in AGI to come and talk with us, and nobody did. And there's another element to the AGI is that if you are one of these AI corporations, then it creates a kind of a race aspect, a kind of a promise that you can make to governments that they're going to have this all-powerful tool. So if you get more funding and you give us more money, we will deliver to you a superpower. And that seems to be one of the motives of behind this AGI myth. But fundamentally, the argument wants to argue that how much this whole notion distorts and undermines our ability to do rational and effective governance of information technology. So the first thing it does is it collapses artificial intelligence applications, which are multifarious and do thousands of different things, and will continue to find different things to do, everything from like diagnosing radiology diagrams to sort of correcting your typing or facial recognition on your phone, all kinds of applications. Those are all different, and they all pose completely different governance problems. So the idea that AI is one thing, kind of the premise behind the European AI, I think, and maybe Viktor will argue with me about that, but it's just a complete distortion of the governance problem. That the governance problems are related to and created by specific applications and specific contexts, and there's no general governance of AI. I actually have students when I'm asking them to make policy proposals, they're like, well, we're gonna make them look at the algorithms. We're gonna make it all transparent, and then I guess society will step in and fix anything. And it's like, really, you're going to look at a bunch of code and a bunch of complex feedback mechanisms, and you're going to say, oh, I know how to do this, or it will never do any harm. I suspect that the people making that code actually don't know fully what the effect is until they run the program and see what happens, right? And there can also be unintended consequences. So the idea that, it's AI is the object of governance is something that we need to challenge. And the other argument is about, again, the way it avoids dealing with human decisions and human agency. So one of the famous examples somebody talks about in the AI doomer literature is, suppose we have an AI that can control the weather. And then they talk about the way various kinds of reward hacking might take place. For example, they might be in control of all the world's thermostats, and they could fake the air pressure settings such that it seemed to be doing what it was programmed to do, but in fact, it wasn't just controlling the weather, it was just controlling the barometers. And I point out in the article, like, look at what skipped here. How did we get control of the weather? How did that happen? And who is, what is the institutions, the social institutions that actually regulate the weather? And think about that as a political problem. Like, you can imagine Syracuse, wants less snow, right? But maybe if we tweak Syracuse to have less snow, then suddenly there's a complete drought in Spain, right? So the real question we need to be asking is, how do social institutions control and manage complex processes? And what role would an AI application play in that process? And again, this AGI myth really just sort of shunts all that aside and makes it all about how do you control this monster?
Great.
Leave it at that and look forward to discussion from Viktor and Joyce and the group here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Milton, for this overview of the paper. I guess I'd like to bring you in, Viktor. for sort of your comment. Milton talked about this sense of panic that is driving attention, perhaps sometimes in the wrong places. To which extent do you think this sense of panic is still driving the different governance frameworks that are emerging or developing across various jurisdictions?
Well, I think there is still some panic there, but there is another panic that has surfaced over the last year or so, and that panic goes in the other direction, almost the opposite direction. That's the panic that we might left behind if we don't let AI develop unencumbered. It seems to me that there is now also debate about the need to take part in the global AI race and really race forward and be faster than the others, have even more data centers, have even more processing capabilities, have even more venture capital and investment money thrown at the problem. This, of course, has or causes in itself multiple challenges or problems. If everybody wants to build a lot of data centers, suddenly there is huge demand at a given supply of hardware and infrastructure elements for such data centers. So that means prices go up. That's what we see today. NVIDIA prices going up, memory prices going up. Then we are some players try to distort the market in order to maintain their lead or let others not catch up and use arguments of cybersecurity or international power or strategic positioning here. We see this with export controls of anything from algorithms to processing chips, and then all kinds of exceptions to that. Now, as Milton said, a lot of times these policy measures also generate perverse outcomes. And we've seen that as well. If you reduce the number of powerful GPU chips that China can buy, then there is a huge demand in China for more parallelized computing, more parallelized modeling, and a huge demand for modeling that doesn't require as much data or as much processing power, which of course then undermines the prevalence of US AI providers. All of this are complex mechanisms, and the biggest problem is the simplification, of the story, that this is a race and we need to win the race, or that this is doom and we are facing doom. It isn't that simple. If it were, we would have solved the problem right now. And because it is so nuanced and because it is so multifaceted, we need to go beyond this simplistic worldview. Peter Swire and I will remember the desire 25 years ago, and then again about 10 years ago, to have data protection regulation to solve all of the problems of data and personal data, from surveillance to discrimination to decision making. And when you look at GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union, you have all of it in one big package, except nobody understands it anymore, and it is contradictory in itself. So I come back to what I said as the design principle. We need humility and self-restraint, flexibility and adaptability in a time when we really don't know exactly what the problem is and how we solve it. Otherwise, we may end up like in the 19th century in Britain, when the first steam engine came up. The government regulator thought that the biggest problem was that people would die of lack of oxygen above 20 miles an hour speed. So they put in a speed limit But the real problem was that the steam vessels exploded from overpressure and killed people. It was the wrong policy intervention. That's what I fear.
Great. Thank you very much, Victor. I have a quick follow-up question before I go back to Milton for his comments. And if people want to ask questions, please put it in the chat or raise your hand, and maybe Karim can help me see who is trying to ask a question. Victor, you mentioned that sort of like characterizing it as winning the AI race is simplistic and can lead to, sort of the wrong outcomes or like negative outcomes. If we look, however, at the AI, the US AI National Vision, which was launched in July, I think the subtitle is Winning the AI Race. What impact do you think this has on how the technologies are developing? And, if the sort of one of the biggest AI developer is pushing in that direction, what does that actually mean for the technology and for how we're governing it?
It seems to me that one of the big dangers of that strategy is that you only look in a particular direction. You only look at more data and more processing power to create ever-increasing models, ever larger models. That seems to be the race that it is going on right now. Now, that's not the only way we can progress and innovate. There are multiple different ways. There are a lot of researchers that look for models that use less data or lose less processing power, or in fact use both less processing power and less data. If such a breakthrough would happen, then that would overnight devalue a lot of the very large infrastructure projects of AI providers in the United States that have sort of pushed for a very traditional, very conventional, throw everything in the kitchen sink at the problem approach that we see, which is precisely what the sort of downside of any simplistic policy paper is, including but not limited to the AI policy paper that came out of the White House last year and that characterized it as a simple and monodimensional race.
Thank you very much. Milton.
Yes, the race is, it's a bad metaphor. I've been saying this, however, we had a 5G race. Do you remember that? And now we have an AI race, and this is clearly a rhetorical device used for political purposes by people with an agenda that want the government to act in a certain way, maybe very quickly. I mean, sometimes it can motivate government action in maybe good ways, but fundamentally it's a fake thing. There's no finish line, right? It's a process of ongoing development. And again, adhering to my view that AI is a bunch of different software applications that is just sort of like a continuation of the development of computing. This is the Georgia Tech whistle we're listening to. Just here to remind us of the industrial age and not gone away. So yeah, the race metaphor is really particularly when it's wedded to national security competition, it's very counterproductive and destructive in certain ways. So it as Victor suggested, it encourages you to sort of indiscriminately throw things. One thing I would remind people of, and it's frequently lost in these discussions, is that markets are a form of governance. And so if indeed these people are over-investing in data centers, they're taking risks and they may pay the price very soon. We saw an over-investment in telecom capacity in the late 90s, and we had the dot-com bust. That was a very serious erosion of a bubble. Whether the AI thing is a bubble or not, again, it's not clear to me. I mean, I think there's going to be larger and larger demand for data centers and for applications and services that rely on data, whether you want to call them AI or not, that's going to be expanding. but whether these are exceeding rational economic constraints, particularly on energy resources, that's something we're going to find out. I think we have to kind of let the price system moderate and regulate a lot of this because, you know, that's really what it's about. Are they making efficiency gains? Are they providing valuable services or not?
And maybe a final question, because we only have 3 minutes left in this part of the discussion. Milton, I wonder whether you think this sort of the hype around AGI is part of the normal process of any new development, and that eventually it will kind of dissipate with more evidence coming through, or do you believe this is a fundamentally kind of a governance problem or an issue that will stay around for the long haul?
I think it will totally dissipate in the sense that there is not going to be a super intelligence that takes over the world and destroys us all. And there may be advancements in AI, but I think we're already learning about some of the constraints, the economic and physical constraints on the current model of the LLM, and the idea that more and more data and more computing power is, I think we're reaching that point in the curve where you're getting diminishing returns. So I think that will become evident to people. Again, there is, as a counterweight to that, however, there are these people who get political and economic benefits from claiming that it's a race and claiming that we have to win it. So we may see this continue for another 5 to 10 years.
Maybe we have time for like a question from the audience that's come to us online. I'll read the online question, Milton, if that's okay. From Marelia Maciel, who says, a couple of decades ago, economic security discussions were about ensuring that governments provide the economic conditions for the prosperity of their peoples. And some economists claim that the impact of AI on productivity and GDP could be actually small, while the level of unemployment could be significant. What kind of governance mechanisms can help workers and civil society to have a say in AI policy? And can internet governance teach us something?
That's a small question. Yeah. Actually, I think there are many ways in which civil society can and is participating in a policy dialogue. Events like this, academics and forums and institutions, advocacy groups, they are all doing a lot. I think that the issue, however, is we have to be very clear about where do we really need collective action, and where do we need sort of decentralized market processes to make decisions about the direction. And finding the right balance is, I think, a function of your institutions, right? So you can go too far towards collective action and just have everybody screaming that we need to control and regulate everything, and that's going to break down. It just doesn't scale. And on the other hand, you can have no collective direction, no constraints, no well-defined property rights, no well-defined constraints on liability.
Yeah.
So I think you just have to find the right balance. And again, I think that has to be done at the application level, not at the general of something called AI, which doesn't really exist.
Okay, thank you. Any final, very quick comments from you, Viktor, before we close this part? Okay, no. Great. Well, thank you very much, both. This has been great and very rich, as always. As I said, keep an eye out for the journal special issue when it's published in the next few weeks. There'll be now a 10-minute break, and then the next part of the conversation will resume. Thank you very much.
Welcome to our second panel here. We have with us Jennifer Lind from Dartmouth, John Lindsay from Georgia Tech right here, and Justin Hendrix from Tech Policy Press. And they will be talking about export controls and the impact of geopolitical barriers on the development of AI. So please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I very much wish I was in Georgia with you right now, as my toes are currently freezing and I can't cross the frozen tundra of my driveway. Anyway, it's lovely to be here with you, even via Zoom. I'm going to talk to you today about a research project I've been doing with my co-author, Michael Maston Duno. We have an article on how the Cold War COCOM regime that restricted technologies to the Soviet Union is relevant to today's US efforts to restrict semiconductor-related technologies to China. And that came out over the fall in Texas National Security Review. So I know the conference that we're here today for is talking about the theme of AI governance, and this is frequently discussed as a aspirational thing in terms of countries getting together to discuss how to regulate AI in our societies and around the world, how to make this economic tool more inclusive so that countries that are lagging behind economically aren't kept even further behind. And there's, of course, the problem of how to not be conquered by robot overlords. I hope somebody's working on that. So this is an important space, obviously, international and transnational questions of AI governance. And we're looking forward to seeing what the meeting in India yields. The fact is, however, is most of AI governance remains national, so conducted at the national level. There's individual countries having conversations about numerous dimensions of AI. We've heard many of them addressed already today, the many biases that it creates, how it will affect economic productivity, and of course, there's the effects on information and on politics. So of course, with any technology like AI, what we call a general purpose technology, we expect it to affect every sector it touches. And so countries, governments face a profound regulatory challenge. What I want to focus on today in the remainder of my remarks is a different dimension, which is national AI governance in the realm of national security policy. And again, this relates to my research on COCOM and the current export control regime. So I'd like to say a few words about past and present efforts by countries to control the spread of advanced technologies to their adversaries, and hopefully highlight a few themes of discussion for the conference today and for going forward. So I'll make 3 points. My first one is that even though we're talking about an economic phenomenon, politics will be very much getting in the way. We'd be tempted to expect, or maybe would be hoping for technologies, quote, natural flow around the world, perhaps in the liberal sense of being driven by considerations of economic efficiency. Perhaps multilateral organizations will make plans for how they can address global inequality by encouraging the spread of AI in certain forms to certain countries or regions. But of course, AI being a dual use, a militarily relevant technology, is going to be of heightened interest to countries in terms of their national security considerations. And so this kind of politics is always going to get in the way. So it's not surprising that we've already seen AI development adhering to strategic divides around the world. So on the one hand, we see aligned countries working together to co-develop the technology. This, of course, describes the US, Japan, South Korea, the UK, Europe, and in fact described the US-China relationship for many years. And then conversely, we see more isolation between actors that have distrustful or hostile relationships, such as the US and Europe vis-a-vis Russia. And then as the relationship between the US and China has grown more tense, this in turn is decreasing their previous quite fruitful cooperation in the AI realm. The US has, of course, hit China with export controls to try and prevent it from obtaining foundational technologies with the goal of slowing China's AI ascent. This harkens back, as I mentioned, to the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, in which the US and its NATO partners created this regime called COCOM to prevent the flow of advanced dual-use technologies to the Soviet Union. Now, at the same time, and this is a theme you'll see throughout my remarks, politics and economics are strongly at odds in the Chinese case because China is a key international market and is already an AI powerhouse. So this makes China harder to isolate and raises the costs to those who might do so. So my first point is that political considerations might dictate that the US provide its friends with AI access and cooperation opportunities, and that politics would dictate that the US punish and isolate countries aligned with China. I think an important insight, though, is that somewhere in the middle, we'll see space for continued trade and technological cooperation. And I actually think, given the Chinese market's centrality to the world and to the United States economy, that space might be rather large. But the key point to remember is that politics are always going to control how large it will be. If we do see a deepening Cold War and intensifying security situation over the Taiwan Strait, for example, that space may be narrowed considerably. Let me turn to my second point, which is that yes, countries are going to seek to control this technology, but the Cold War example shows us that this is a messy, politically fraught, and very leaky process. So the US is already trying to control the spread of AI-related technologies to China. And we see, again, from the COCOM experience, many reasons. This is one thing we tease out in the article, is the various reasons, the various mechanisms that make technology control regimes so challenging. So in COCOM, this was an organization that met every month in Paris between the US, its NATO partners, and a handful of others. The group negotiated which technologies were banned. And so this was a rather institutionalized regime among close security allies. Nevertheless, we saw tremendous discord and even frequent defection. So even when European countries faced a severe security threat, the threat of nuclear war over their territories, from a decidedly hostile communist superpower, which geography put right in their faces, still there was tremendous dissent from European governments about restricting technology flows to the Soviet Union. These governments were under intense pressure from their own firms, their national firms, to be able to access the Soviet market. The Soviet market was tiny. It wasn't a major trading partner. And as I said, the strategic stakes were massive. Nuclear war over your territory, the threat of the Soviet army flooding across the Fulda Gap, and the war being fought on your territory. The group was made up of close security allies, NATO partners. So you think that conditions might never be better for controlling technology spread. But an insight that we found from this case was that all along the way, the US was far more interested in slowing the flow of technologies to the Soviets, and that these partner governments fought the United States basically every step of the way. They were jealous of the US in many cases. They often restricted it, or they often accused it of restricting technologies in ways to favor American firms and to discriminate against European firms, for example. So there was a lot of intra-alliance jealousies there. And over, firms cheated, so enabling the USSR to gain access to key technologies. So one of the biggest lessons, I think, from this case is just how much firms and their governments, as a result, want these transactions to happen. They want to sell this technology. It's like this massive tidal wave that's coming toward you. And there's some folks, trying to kind of create this rickety dam with nailing a few boards together. That's the image that we should have. There's also the fact that the targeted countries, so in the COCOM case, the Soviet Union and China today, they are not passive players. So the Soviet Union poured resources into espionage and other activities aimed at gaining access to the technologies. So my co-author, Mike Mastanduno, and I called it the Jurassic Park Doctrine, that just as nature finds a way, targeted countries have a way through their own efforts and through the inefficiencies of export control regimes of getting their hands on the technology they need. And that was then, when the Soviet Union was an isolated country, a tiny market, and when the countries trying to work together were close security allies facing a dire security threat. This brings me to my third point, which is what this means for today. And I'll be talking about the current US-led semiconductor export control regime, but the same would be true for any subsequent AI-related effort. So as many of you may have intuited already, conditions for controlling technology spread today and the nature of the adversary with the United States today are quite different. China is a major market. For many countries, it's their number one trading partner. Their firms are highly dependent on access to the Chinese market, and those firms are every day calling up their political leaders and saying, why can't we sell these things to China? Furthermore, the countries that the US is trying to coordinate with in this space have highly varying levels of threat perception of China. One of them, the Netherlands, doesn't even live near China, right? It's in a different region altogether. So think also of the current uncertainty about US leadership. Now, of course, we don't want to romanticize the Cold War period. It's a time of lots of jealousies, lots of mistrust of the US and wondering about the level of US commitment, just as, is our ongoing themes. But nobody at that time was worried about a possible US invasion of a NATO ally, right? So we have all the favorable conditions that existed then do not exist today. And we also have a country, a targeted country, China, that is vastly more technologically advanced and vastly more connected in the global economy relative to the Soviet Union then. So my third and final point is that as much as politics does shape things, and as much as Washington would like to restrict AI-related technologies to China, past efforts suggest that it will face an uphill battle as it tries to do so. So I'll stop there.
So I'm Justin from Tech Policy Press, and grateful to talk to you all today. I think my job is just to kind of bring in some of the news headlines from the present, kind of what's happening, and then we'll obviously hear about the future in the next sort of intro, and then hopefully continue the discussion. But I guess I'll pick up the point about uncertainty and lack of clarity. And, the world's a confusing place. All this talk about controls on chips and the importance of controls on chips. And then, yesterday, we see, of course, the Trump administration formally approving the NVIDIA H200 chip exports to China. Those applications are supposed to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis rather than presumed denied, as I understand it. NVIDIA, quite happy about that. Jensen is the CEO of NVIDIA. Jensen Huang is obviously at every possible public appearance with Donald Trump and has lobbied the president personally on this. Things moving very quickly, and what the logic is necessarily for these things appears more commercial at the moment than necessarily security considerations. And I think you also see that commercial logic at play in a number of different ways, even with regard to some things which I think most people, when they look from the outside, might not understand at all. People see Greenland. What in the world does the United States want with Greenland? Why would we be rattling our sabers over Greenland? But when you kind of look more closely at it and you recognize the interest in rare earths and the high priority that the administration's put on rare earths and securing AI supply chains, and then you start to read some of these State Department communications. Just this week, Under Secretary Jacob Hellberg gave a talk along a Qatari official talking about Pax Silica, this partnership the Trump administration's tried to form around rare earth and AI supply chains in particular. He said, if the 20th century ran on oil and steel, the 21st century runs on compute and the minerals that feed it. So things that might seem outlandish or really against the sort of standard way of thinking about the international order begin to make sense through the lens of this kind of race to AI supremacy. Greenland sits on, I think, the 8th largest reserves of rare earths. They're looking for germanium and gallium and other semiconductor components there. This Pax Silica coalition, which has come together, is trying to secure control the physical supply chain of compute. And that appears to be, driving serious thinking in the administration about how to commandeer Greenland for American purposes. So it is a moment of confusion. It was mentioned earlier, India is about to have this big summit, the AI Impact Summit. Whether any of this type of thing will actually get discussed in an honest way is unclear to me. We'll see what the ultimate kind of conversation is and what the communique that comes out. We can always expect, a friendly communique. Although at the last one, there was one country, or I think 2 countries missing, including the United States, from that final declaration among the elites that were gathered there. But will this even be a point of discussion? Are we in a situation where there's a kind of actual conversation about AI governance that appears to be going on much closer to, kind of halls of power that are more hard-nosed and hard power oriented? And are these kind of soft power AI governance conversations really just sales events for corporations that want to meet executives who show up? Look as well, I would point you to Pete Hegseth's speech alongside Elon Musk and SpaceX this week. Some of the communication that came out of the Pentagon this week about the role of artificial intelligence in American defense. The goal is to take guardrails off, to secure the AI future, to demonstrate American supremacy, both militarily and technologically. And this kind of conversation about AI governance is really on the back foot there. So I don't know. I'll put those out as some provocations just from things that have happened in the last couple of days. I guess one last thing I'll mention, maybe as part of the news roundup, and which is the Apple Google deal just this week. And I think that's another one that sort of, to me, raises a bunch of questions about where we're headed. And Milton was talking about the data center boom and questions about this approach to artificial intelligence and how all that will bear out. And I don't know. I mean, it's probably too early to tell, like, what exactly is the bet here. Has someone at Apple decided that AI models, these generative AI models, are essentially headed towards commoditization? It doesn't make any sense to spend a lot of money there. and try to kind of create a competitive product? Are they really truly convinced that Google has such a advantage that it's the way to go, and their prior sort of dalliance with OpenAI is worth sweeping under the rug? But I do think that that's another kind of dimension in the current moment that does matter, as we see these kind of power concentrate in just a handful of companies, and that changes the kind of calculus that I think is going on in the marketplace. So, anyways, a handful of points just from recent news. Pax Silica, India AI Summit, and whether it's relevant. Fast moving competitive environment in artificial intelligence.
All right, thank you, Justin.
Okay, I'm rounding out the all J panel here with Jenny, Justin, and John. Hi, Jenny and Justin. I'm the shady, dark figure in the back of the room here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about and question the strategic rationale for AI controls, with a focus really on the strategic and military dimensions. If you listen to a lot of experts, 2026, 2027 really should be watershed years. A lot of people are talking about these as the year of potential takeoff or AGI self-improvement, perhaps lock-in for firms that already have advantage and are gaining new economic advantage with AI, and maybe some major military disruption. Now, when we look back on this in 2028, I think we're going to have political concerns that will rank far above AI. But if we take these for what they are, this is a claim of major change, and it's often in the national security context stated together with a belief or a fear that China will be ready for an invasion of Taiwan in 2027. So there's this convenient confluence of this great strategic danger and this accumulation of AI advantage. And that might provide some insight to the urgency of these technological controls on AI, if you believe that this is going to be the key to military power in the future in this particular contingency. So to be clear about the argument, right, it's that you take the technological inputs, chips give you better data centers, gives you better AI, and that gives you military power and economic dominance. And I just want to complicate that a little bit, because I think we now have some emerging, maturing literature in international relations about the sources of military power, which really bring that assumption into question. So let's go back to first principles a little bit on what is AI and what incredible improvements in machine learning are providing. What they're providing are reduced costs in prediction. Prediction means you're filling in missing information, right? So you drop the cost, you improve the scope of prediction, and you can get all kinds of great things like LLMs that can write, impressive essays and self-driving cars and things like that. But this is only one input to decision. Decision also needs data, information. It needs action, and it needs judgment. And judgment are your preferences, your priority rankings, your values, what you care about, right? And AI can optimize those things, but figuring out what matters is ultimately a human job. In the national security space, that also means figuring out what your national interests are, your rules of engagement, your values, your commitments to norms, the most contested parts of the national security space, okay? So, for example, right, if I had a little strategic assistant and it was going to help me come up with deterrence policies, and I said, give me a policy that is going to maximize strategic stability. I don't want a war to break out, right? Well, the machine would be very wise to say, well, appeasement and accommodation is the way to go. And he'd say, no, I didn't mean that, okay? I also want to have influence over the status quo, right? In fact, I might even want to improve it. The machine might say, well, here is your really aggressive coercive diplomacy policy, right? That's going to have a lot of costly signals. You're going to start some small wars, right? And others are going to know you're serious. And I'm like, that sounds expensive, right? I don't want to do that. Like, can we also minimize the cost of our deterrence policy? It'll be like, gotcha, right? Here is a bluffing strategy where you're going to make a bunch of threats that you're not really serious about. I'm like, no, it has to be real. I have to have military power to fight and win the war in case deterrence fails. It'll be like, gotcha. Like, we're going to build a bunch of maneuver forces. We're going to have a bunch of high-speed space and cyber stuff that you can't tell anybody about. I'm like, it moves around a lot. I can't tell anybody about it. How am I going to make credible commitments? So you get the point, right? So like, if I want to have a strategy of deterrence, I need to figure out, do I care about stability, influence, efficiency, power? All of those things are important. Which one do you want, right? And those are questions of judgment. So the thing about AI is that if you have military organizations, strategic communities that are buying more prediction capabilities, that's great, but it doesn't substitute for human beings. It actually makes them more important because the complements to prediction, data, judgment, and action actually become more valuable. Just a classic economic argument, right? If bread becomes cheaper, then butter becomes more valuable, okay? So I think this has a couple of important consequences in the strategic realm. Number one, if you are getting more AI and you're making data and judgment more important, you're doing this in a realm where data is notoriously uncertain. You've got fog of war, you've got friction, right? The strategic world is a highly uncertain world. So data is going to be hard to come by, hard to rely on, right? Very controversial to get. Judgment is also going to be inherently controversial for all the reasons we've discussed. Okay, figuring out what you're willing to fight and die for is kind of the highest level of controversy. Number two, because data and judgment become more important, organizations become more complex, right? You're trying to manage secret data, you're trying to manage your data access policies, you need to figure out who's doing what the division of labor between human and machines are. You're gonna have judgment problems at the top command level, and you're gonna have judgment problems at the bottom while you have military personnel that are constantly debugging these machines and trying to tailor them to the specific use situations, which and there are all kinds of surprises that always come up in military type situations. So because data and judgment are more important, the institutions that manage them become more complex. That means organizational design, personnel policy, doctrine, force employment processes, all of these non-technological soft factors become incredibly important. Number three, that kind of talks about the organizational solution, but the problems start to change as well, right? If data and judgment are really important, then me as a strategic adversary, I want to complicate your data and judgment, right? So I want to invest in cyber operations, electronic warfare, influence, disinformation, right? Anything to start competing and messing with your data reliability, your data processing, all of this sort of thing. And I also want to start messing with judgment, right? Which means all kinds of things about creating ambiguities, creating controversies, undermining, consensus judgments, undermining coalitions and their joint beliefs, operating in morally ambiguous ways, right? Things that are going to make judgment more difficult. Okay, so let me finally tie this back to where we started with this kind of general claim of chips, data centers, give you AI, give you military power. What that is basically a claim is that the inputs are going to give you the outputs. But we've already looked at, we're actually talking about specific inputs that are giving us AI, which is now making these other complements more important, right? Which is increasing the complexity of the organizational production of military power and also creating the complexity of the strategic problems that those organizations are going to be asked to face. Now, we know that China has challenges in both of these areas. Right? The People's Liberation Army has bought a lot of really high-speed military weaponry, but it's never fought a modern war under technological conditions. Okay, you compare that to the United States, they just pulled off an exquisitely orchestrated, highly complex military intelligence operation in Venezuela. Lots of caveats on that, thing, but like you compare what the US military has demonstrated its ability to do again and again and again versus what China wants to be able to do. And there are serious questions about, China's ability to actually turn all of this technology into usable military power. We have a lot of literature in strategic studies, right, which shows that you can have okay, not great tech, but if you have the right doctrine, you can still prevail on the battlefield. Conversely, you can have really, really high quality technology and a lot of it, but if you don't have the right force employment doctrine, you might still be defeated on the battlefield. Okay, so this means that we are putting controls on the inputs to the inputs to the inputs to the inputs of military power, right? That have a very, very indirect relationship to what's actually going to happen. And ironically, actually might be taking away one of the things that would be injecting additional friction and complexity into the nominal adversary. Okay, and this is at the same time that those technical trade barriers are potentially weakening the competitive position of firms that are subject to those controls, while providing incentives for Chinese firms to develop competitive substitutes. So, so that's a lot there, right? But the basic idea is that once you start thinking about AI not as a substitute, right, where you invest more in it, it substitutes for existing economic and military capabilities, you get great advantages. And you start thinking of it as a complement, and that means you invest in it, and now it makes organizational data and judgment processes more complicated and more important. It really, really changes the way that we understand strategic competition in this space. And I think undermines in a pretty fundamental way a lot of the justifications for these technical trade barriers.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
I know we have one question in the audience. Letian, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I'm Letian from IGP. Thank you for the great conversation. So my question is for Dr. Jennifer Lin. Due to leading LLMs, open source efforts, can you hear me? Am I well heard?
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So due to like, especially like DeepSeek, so there are open source efforts in China. And so leading Chinese LLMs that have adopted a norm of releasing open source models versus the current like mainstream US big tech company was to keep their models closed. And how would you think this kind of a seemingly counterintuitive trend will affect China and the US models, especially the technology diffusion to the other countries? Thank you.
Thanks. I think this is actually a topic of big debate right now, and I'm not sure to what extent I can provide more insight onto that debate. I think that the key question is related to the phenomenon of diffusion, right? Which is through which process, through what mechanisms do we think that there's going to be more diffusion of certain systems, certain models? And so the debate is with the success, a tremendous diffusion of the DeepSeek model, both within China and across the world. I think there's been a lot of claims with people saying this open source method is promoting significant diffusion, and so this is something that the United States should be more engaged in than it is. So I think your question is one that we don't have an answer to at this moment, but it draws our attention to the fact that there are these different methods. There's the open source method, and then also to what extent are governments promoting the spread of different models through cooperation, through aid, through technological cooperation efforts, government to government, and so on. And so I would just connect this to the broader issue of diffusion, and to note that this is also a political process. It's an economic one in the sense of this technologies diffuse all over the world because firms want them. But again, going back to my remarks, nation states are very interested in their products diffusing more and their political adversary, military adversaries' products diffusing less. There's all sorts of things we could talk about standardization, blocks, technology blocks with 5G and Huawei infrastructure versus other infrastructure, right? So this is again an economic phenomenon, but it's very much influenced by the political processes. And so what the governments are trying to figure out with these controversies over DeepSeek and open source more broadly is this a better way to encourage this diffusion and thereby advance these political goals?
Right. Thank you, Jennifer. I know we have a question from Peter.
Did you want to do the online question first?
We can go to you and then.
Okay. Thanks. So John said that the progress is happening on chips plus power plus data. Panel is about chips. I just wanted to mention that with a co-author, we have a new article out on personal data as a dual-use technology, going into the history of export controls and seeing how there's new rules on limits on personal data for the first time the U.S. has been trying. And a couple of themes really echo things we've heard here, the leakiness of controls that Jennifer Lind talked about, and how far from clear it is when cutoffs turn out to help or hurt innovation in the other country. So it's, I think, a complementary literature, and the concerns about data parallel the concerns about chips that have been discussed in this panel.
Thank you. I have a question from the audience here to John from Jyoti Pandey. From a US perspective, export controls are framed as security tools, but for middle powers like India and Brazil, they function as development constraints. How does the US envision building durable AI alliances if access to chips, minerals, and tech transfers remain discretionary rather than predictable?
Well, I don't know how the US envisions anything these days, much less managing its allies in any way that it's number one, useful, or number two, predictable. And predictability is important in this area. But I think the question really gets to this fundamental ambiguity that exists in all technical trade barriers that are justified for security concerns, but yet also have these economic impacts. And the question always is, does the security benefit of that control justify the economic hit, number one, or is the real motivation economic, right? About promoting national champions or excluding access to competitors. And that sometimes is hard to figure out, right? On the Chinese side, right? There's like, that's kind of the classic Chinese way, is to like create, access, controls on access to the Chinese markets in order to, promote, local champions and access to US IP. But here we're in a situation where, because the market is so fundamentally global and integrated, these controls are actually having a negative effect on a lot of US firms. And so I think this question is very well stated. Like, there are these big negative externalities for allies. And I think kind of the open question, which I don't have a really clear understanding, maybe Jenny has a better bit of insight on how much of that kind of developmental hit is accidental, or is there an intentional angle as well? I don't know.
Jennifer, I don't know if you wanted to chime in, otherwise we have another question in the audience.
Sure. So, I mean, there's one way of looking at this, which says that these export controls are one tool of statecraft that countries are employing in these geopolitical rivalries. And so you would expect that this is kind of the more realist paradigm that would kind of abstract away the economic noise that I kind of brought into my remarks, economic and political noise. So that the kind of straightforward, realist, strategic view is to say, this is a serious geopolitical competition, military rivalry. The US is going to be deeply concerned about China accessing these technologies. It's going to create its own AI kind of ecosystem internationally, that is, with countries that are like-minded when it comes down to the China threat. And so are you in or are you out? Right. So sure, if you want to hedge, more power to you. Go for it, India, with your strategic autonomy, but don't expect to get all the benefits of cooperation with the US. So that might be a very realist way of thinking about this. And with all kind of big theory like this, the reality I think is way more complicated because as we see, and as I suggested, that there is actually significant kind of gray area or middle ground. Even though India is not a close ally of the US or an ally, the US has been intently looking at can we build up India in this realm? And even though India is not remotely on board with the US as a close partner, we know this. So there's all sorts of reasons to think that these countries that we're worried about, oh, are they going to be kind of run over by the bus of, geopolitical competition? They might actually be able to kind of play both sides and do so in a way that's very useful for their economic growth. So I think those two images are kind of in conflict with one another. There's this kind of strict geopolitical view of looking at things, but I think when we're looking at U.S. foreign policy today and world politics today, it doesn't conform to that, right? There's so much we're trying to figure out, and so that's why I thought actually there is going to be kind of a lot of the opportunity for these developing countries and even middle powers and so on to maintain relationships with China, to even sell to China. I mean, perhaps the most striking one is Taiwan, right? Like Taiwan faces an existential threat from this country, and they still want to sell to it. It kind of is there's just no way of understanding this in the kind of realist space. So anyway, I think that we are not, in fact, in that kind of strict realist paradigm world, and we're in a far messier one. And so I think that's going to be actually to the benefit of countries that are kind of caught in between.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have time for two more questions. We'll take one from Jyoti Pandey, and then we'll move on to the audience.
You've already asked my question, but on alliances, since I have the opportunity to speak here, it is really interesting that a lot of the middle powers are still worried about AI governance, and they're trying to come up, whereas the governance rules, they're stuck in the conversation around rules and norm making. Whereas I feel with diffusion and export controls, it's much more about access and, like you rightly mentioned, about alliances. And the US is very coherent about wanting to build its own sphere of influence, both territorially as well as in the digital realm. So I'm wondering again, particularly because I'm based in India, we have an existential, crisis with China. They are our neighbors. We have military issues with them. But we also have an ongoing trade escalation with the US. And the kind of signals it's sending, this kind of escalation between the US and India for a lot of the middle powers, is that this is a highly unstable period. And for long-standing alliances and new emerging ones like ISET and Trust and Quad, again, I just want to get a reading of the room. What do you feel about these alliances and their future? Are they going to regroup? Are they going to have to evolve? Jennifer, John, anybody can answer this. This is not to Justin. This is not specifically to anyone.
Well, I would like to jump in there.
Go ahead.
But I think it's an excellent question. It's like these alliances to make digital technology, which is so fundamental and so pervasive, the basis of geopolitical alliances is a pretty crazy idea when you think about it. It's not like you're talking about missiles or destructive weapons. You're talking about a technology that is everywhere. And it came home to me when I was at the State of the Net conference, and we had a senator from Tennessee saying that TP-Link routers were national security threats. And I have one in my house, right? And it's like, I don't feel threatened at all. right? So, yeah, these alliances, I think it cannot succeed to form geopolitical alliances around digital technology. I just don't think it can succeed, but I think that the commitment to do so can be executed and is being executed. And it's creating a dynamic in which China controls rare earths, or they search for any strategic input that they have control over, and we search for anyone that we have control. And it's a process of, it's kind of a zero-sum game that I think nobody is going to win. So I'm glad that you posed the question that way, Jody. It's like, think about what these alliances are about and what they actually mean.
I think that the point I wanted to make on this is, the thing that makes geopolitics so challenging in the 21st century and different than the 20th is that you simultaneously have dense economic globalization and fierce geopolitical competition at the same time. So everything overlaps, and it means that, like, when we think in absolute, terms about technology, AI, competition, military power, I think we really do ourselves a disservice because you have to choose one or the other, but you're in a world in which you're in this superposition, right? And so we have to say, well, AI is not one thing. It's chips and algorithms and autonomous vehicles and drones and immigration and human talent and all of these things. And you might have different agreements and governance structures in all of those areas, right? And there may be places where alliances work and places where there's a lot of friction. And I think you're going to have a whole lot of heterogeneity across these different governance areas and across the entire spectrum of kind of political and economic relations among states. And yeah, that's more messy and that's more complicated, but maybe there's some opportunity there as well, because you might be able to move more quickly than getting really, really sucked into the totalizing, all or nothing. You've either ever been a realist or a liberal world. Well, no, it's something else.
One more last question from the audience.
Good. Before we move on, could I just volunteer one thing I just wanted to add in there, almost as a question to my fellow panelists, but something Milton made me think about is the extent to which folks think about hype as a kind of quotient in all of this, and the extent to which hype is a kind of quantity that almost has a political weight here, especially because there's so much hype around AI. And I was listening to Pete Hegseth's speech yesterday, and the extent to which it kind of comes out in the things that officials are saying, the expectations about what AI will be able to do for, war fighters and the U.S. military, and the expectations about its importance in terms of setting the U.S. up for the future, et cetera. And I wonder also how that hype plays into these relationships between, powers, middle powers, et cetera. If any of you have thought about that, Jennifer or John, as a quotient.
Yes, right. Hype is like a bad JPEG. It's a really lossy compression of an incredibly complicated field. And unfortunately, time-constrained policymakers need it. And that's the generous interpretation. The other interpretation is hype is fantastic for selling policies and products. So I think this is an absolutely real and inevitable feature of this space.
All right, any final thoughts, Jennifer? But we really need to close this and move on to the next panel after.
Yeah, I would just like to pick up on something I think Milton said, that the idea, he had a line of something like, what are these alliances for? And I really want to underscore that. The US alliances are not alliances that formed against China, right? So the US alliance with South Korea is about North Korea, and the South Koreans really don't want to be in alliance about China. The Europeans, that was something else too, right? And they're not even in the same region as China. The Japanese, I think, is the closest alliance that the US has that's actually more China focused. And so it doesn't have allies that are on board with a kind of China containment effort. And so again, contrasting that to the best case scenario, which, as I noted during the Cold War, these were allies about the target in question, the Soviet Union. But even then, cooperation was incredibly difficult. So I think the conditions today are very new in many ways, and the implications for the middle powers, for the developing countries, everything's on the table. We're at a very different era than we were in the past. I'll close with that.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, so I will give what I think is a little bit of a quick frame, and then we will hand off to Brenden for even a more particular but big frame. And then we'll let the gentleman on screen give us some rather particular views about how to address the issues. So one version of this story is effectively, you should prioritize. Apparently I should prioritize something. All right. One way to think about this is, relatively recently, once upon a time, as it were, there was an equilibrium. Google, Facebook. When I teach a class on fake news or not, I do remember from when I was at Google, it's fascinating between the Atlantic and New York Times, there were almost every other year, news is dead, news is back, news is dead, news is back. And the companies, interestingly, would try and fund and fuel them because I think they knew that at one level of diversity of news sources was a big deal for their business, right? They needed that information. Shorthand, that equilibrium I think was pretty decent for a while. You had YouTube figuring out ways to kind of protect music or not. People are not always thrilled. There's some fair use arguments in there, but it's a fairly elegant solution if you understand how Content ID works. You've got then the next wave of all the other social media, TikTok, etc. Tons of information, maybe too much. Everywhere, lots of stuff being generated, lots of people making money. If you want many voices, they're there. The thing that then happens beyond that is Google's research comes up with a little thing called the transformer, and the paper is attention is all you need. They don't do much with it. I actually saw an article suggesting they were a little bit careful about what to do next with the breakthrough with LLMs. That's what that was. But OpenAI comes along, plays with it, and to be clear, its first iteration, OpenAI, was being fairly scientific. They were putting out papers going, oh, look, we hit some benchmarks on emulating human speech. But then all of a sudden, one of the iterations starts to do something a little more creative and seems to answer questions. And Altman himself openly admits in a New York Times interview, well, at some point, it's not about the lab. You just throw it out there to see what happens, which prompted the paper that I think is partially why Milton invited me to be on this panel. One of the great things about being at Tech is I'm embedded with the machine learning group. And one of our CS professors, Mark Breedel, and I started kicking this around. He said, oh, wait a minute. What did they use to build that? Well, it turned out they used a whole bunch of books to which they had no rights. So our paper between copyright and computer science went through and said, we're not sure yet. It was early and frankly predicted pretty accurately everything that's happened in the lawsuits against the LLM because there was really good law. And OpenAI, I don't know what was going on, but either ignored counsel or they had poor counsel because this was pretty well settled law about what you can do on how you acquire copyrighted material to train and the issues that happen when you start to put outputs out there. But, move fast and break things, Altman, warp speed, trying to get ahead, some of the other themes we heard about, races, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's a couple other interesting little points there. One thing we noted was if you're really doing the computer science, natural language processing, LLM benchmarks, you don't need entire text. I asked my colleagues, well, wait a minute, couldn't you just sample bits and pieces if you really, it's like, absolutely. You don't need the whole book by Rowling to get a sense of how Rowling writes. You could pick it up. So then you've actually limited on the output end, the ability of the machine to actually cough up the exact text, which is what happened. Let's be clear, the papers that came out on this were arguably attacks or hacks. It took a lot to really prompt it to nudge out the full chapters, but it's still a problem. It's really certainly bad optics for the policy people and the people who talk to Congress in the room, right? Like this is not a good place to be. So you get all of those problems going, and you then get some fascinating outcomes. So for some of the folks, I don't know if Victor's still here and all, but certainly those of us who've been around since the early days of the internet, to me, everything old is new again. This is copyright owners are getting a second bite at deep control over their material. They kind of lost that before. I actually know someone who's a major person within one of the big, shall we just call it, copyright industry players, and literally seemed like he was salivating. It was, I'm going to get my money finally on all the new stuff that I generate from this. I was like, I don't think you're going to get what you think you're going to get, but you've got new teeth, absolutely. Enter in some fascinating things that we'll get into, right? The question of that this raises from my perspective that I think will be interest to this community is certainly access to information, right? At one level, if we're asking any of these information providers to be accurate, they need the latest for the LLM, right? Literally, if you think about how quickly everything's changing, as John was talking about, just geopolitics, you know, the notion of if the LLM's cut off, if you want pre-George Floyd and post-George Floyd, how we talk about things radically changes. You can't say just use public domain. That's not going to work. On the other hand, there's a real question about the people who are doing the work to generate papers and books and news and other media, that there's a question of what does it look like to be compensated. So with that, I'll hand off to Brenden. Brendan's going to give us a high-level view of what markets might do. And as I said, I may say something else, but most likely we'll just jump to our gentleman by remote and get some really interesting deep dives on approaches.
All right. Thank you, Deven. So I'm going to make some remarks based on the article that came out in the Journal of Cyber Policy, try and be a bit provocative, in the spirit of generating some conversation here. And I'll hook you with the era of openly available data as a commons for use in AI training appears to be ending. We're not the first people to say that. And I'm going to suggest that this kind of open versus closed framing really underappreciates how property rights evolve over time when a resource becomes increasingly valuable and what the effects are of that. And so the paper explores what we call data enclosure in generative AI, where data that is previously available in open or shared arrangements is made increasingly exclusive through a variety of technological, contractual, and market-based governance mechanisms. And this activity is really the formalization of the ability to exclude, benefit from, and transfer value associated with data. And now different kinds of data are critical inputs for AI models, and the market is naturally developing these institutions to clarify these rights. And the evolution benefits both data suppliers and AI model platforms. And it's not just a defensive move, a reaction to legal concerns, I think, for instance, copyright, but it's also a strategic move to gain competitive advantage by securing high quality, differentiated data. And this evolving shift is seemingly disrupting adjacent markets like search and digital advertising, with implications for competition and also just AI governance generally. So a little bit about kind of the drivers. So there's this quality shift and competitive advantage. The assumption that more data equals better AI is changing, and the paper goes into a little bit of analysis of foundation model documents and chatbot arena leaderboards, and shows how this correlation between sheer data set size and model performance is weakening. We see models trained on smaller, curated data sets outperforming models trained on massive, indiscriminate crawls. And model provider documents highlight these qualitative differences extensively about the data used in their training, taking advantage of proprietary archives, specialized content, rather than just scraping the web. That improves model performance and also creates a competitive advantage for those providers. Now, here's a different kind of motivation. Defense of an existing business model. And this gets a little bit at what Deven was talking about. Publishers and incumbent platforms have incentives to preserve the attention economy that is supported by eyeballs and ads. And the open web really relies on this quid pro quo of crawling of content is allowed in exchange for being sent traffic, search referrals, which is monetized via ads. And generative AI has disrupted this adjacent market. If an AI platform gives a user an answer directly, it is assumed that the user never really clicks through to the underlying source. And thus, enclosure is a rational defense of existing ad-supported web. Publishers and other content creators are enclosing data because search referrals are, in theory, being replaced by direct answers on the other platforms. So the mechanisms that we're seeing are quite flexible and diverse. So we're moving towards an era of the capability to negotiate rights almost in real time, where governance is increasingly complicated and flexible to meet a wide variety of needs and interactions. We see this in contractual growth, both the growth of bilateral licensing and collective licensing efforts around data for AI. We see it in technical standards, particularly the robots text exclusion protocol extensions. They're evolving from what could be called politeness protocols to tools for expressing granular access control and also asset usage preferences. And this work is occurring in the IETF's, WebBot Auth, and AI prep working groups. But simply tagging data with a do not train or other rules is really hard to enforce. And to do this, we see a shift towards authentication and APIs enforced by platforms. And this brings me to kind of the role of access intermediaries. Security firms, and Zaid will go into this, like Cloudflare, are effectively becoming enforcers of these rights. They allow websites to differentiate traffic, letting a search crawler in to maintain ad revenue, for instance, while blocking particular kinds of AI bots out to prevent training or other uses. And this allows the data owner to exclude specific actors until terms are met. Now, I think what I really want to get at is the impact on competition, and that this is really about disruption and not just consolidation. We often fear that data enclosure will simply entrench an incumbent giant, but the data that I saw in the paper and analyzed in the paper tells a story of early disruption in unsettled markets. So we see early signs of an incumbent losing ground in search and ads. After the launch of ChatGPT in 22, Google saw its search market share growth decelerate significantly, about negative 1.21% trend, while Microsoft Bing saw their growth accelerate, nearly tripling to 7.3%. Granted, the market shares are quite. Moreover, the advertising revenue growth across all search competitors slowed roughly 6% in 24, and it shifted to retail, social, and other platforms that leverage enclosed data about their users to serve highly personalized ads. And now, obviously, Google didn't stand still. It incorporated AI summaries into its search results. Nonetheless, its search ad revenue rate of growth is still declining. 1 minute? Okay, so I'm going to move straight to the implication and conclusion. So enclosure here has enabled competitors. It doesn't necessarily act as a defensive moat for an incumbent. The challengers like OpenAI are using exclusive data deals to differentiate their model capabilities and attack Google's core business. That suggests that market competition is dynamic. It's an ongoing process of innovation and adaptation, potential upheaval across multiple AI-enabled platforms. So the post-open web is not a failure. That's what I would say. It's a market-based response to technological change. And the call would be to the audience here and elsewhere, let's stop debating it as open versus closed, or at least have a more nuanced discussion. We need to accept that clarified rights, particularly the right to exclude, are necessary for creators to survive in a Gen AI enabled world where the attention economy model associated with some services is shifting. And then for policymakers, their job really is to understand and monitor platform markets to ensure that they remain contestable. so that data enclosure continues to drive the kind of disruption that we're seeing today.
Perfect. Okay, that leaves us for about 8 minutes-ish. Zaid, if you could pick it up, please.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Zaid, the head of U.S. public policy for Cloudflare, based in Washington, D.C. And Brenden, thanks for kind of previewing some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today, which is the future of crawling, I guess we could call it. So for a little background, and this is stuff that I think that we all know, but for the past 30 years or so, the open web has operated on a simple, like, unwritten contract. Creators provide content for free, and in exchange, they get traffic and discovery via search engines. But we've seen in the past few years that sort of AI has broken that unwritten contract. Today, models are trained on the same content to provide direct answers, which often bypassing the source website entirely. So people are no longer putting something into a search engine, clicking on it and then going through the articles. Oftentimes they're just, getting an answer straight from the search engine or from the chatbot. And so at Cloudflare, we believe that and again, Brenden talked about this a little bit, but the handshake at the robots.txt, it's just no longer enough. It's not working in the way that would be helpful for content creators to make sure that they get the recognition for the work that they put into creating content. So on July 1st of last year, we launched a new product to give control back to the people who actually build the internet, the content creators. And to add on to that, in addition to sort of that contract, but we've seen this AI boom, we've seen an explosion in bot activity. And it's not just the volume that's concerning, it's the behavior of some of the bots and the things that they do. So our researchers have found that many AI bots are now are actively trying to evade detection. They don't actually want you to know what they're doing. We've seen them spoofing user agents to look like legitimate browsers and ignoring the standards robot.tdx directives that have governed the web for decades. So they're just, kind of, on their own, doing, not playing by the rules that people have been playing by for so long. And what we've seen, the impact that we've seen is that small publishers and independent creators, they're being hit the hardest. They are seeing their bandwidth consumed by scrapers that offer zero attribution and zero return traffic. So, the work that they put into their research or whatever content they're putting on the web, they are not getting visits to their website in the way that they had previously. And this isn't just a technical problem. It's, we see it as an existential threat to the incentive structure of the internet. So as I mentioned, on July 1st, we introduced this new, what we call the easy button for the web. With one click, any Cloudflare user, so you do have to be a Cloudflare user, from your personal blog or from, any major news outlet, they can block all known AI crawlers and scrapers. And then we use our global sensor, which sees just a massive portion of all internet traffic, because we have about 20% of the internet that sits behind us, to build a sophisticated detection engine that identifies bots even when they try to hide, because they're not always honest about who they are and what they're doing. And this, for us, we're not trying to, break AI or kill AI in any way. Instead, it's just about restoring consent. Content creators shouldn't have to be experts in bot management just to protect their own intellectual property. So, while blocking is the first step, the long-term goal isn't a walled-off internet. The goal, and I think that Brenden talked about this as well, is more of fair market, right? So we launched a tool called AI Audit. And this allows publishers to see exactly which models are calling them, how often, and what their content is worth, what they could, get paid for their content. And this leads to our core proposal in the marketplace, a marketplace for data. So if an AI company, if they want high quality real-time data to train models or power an agent, they should be able to pay for it directly through the infrastructure that delivers it. So for Cloudflare users on the Cloudflare dashboard, a creator can eventually, and this is still, in beta right now, but a creator could eventually set their own terms. For example, they could say, you can crawl my site for 1 cent per page, or you can crawl me if you provide clear citation and a link, right? So some people don't actually necessarily want to get paid. Some people just want to get the credit for the work that they've put in and for someone to cite them, as opposed to, having no attribution whatsoever for the work that they've done. So, if we don't solve this, we think that the internet, could just fundamentally change the way that we've been using it for the past few decades. Creators will stop publishing because they can't monetize. AI models will then have no new data to learn from, and the quality of AI itself will begin to degrade. Right now, only the largest media conglomerates have the legal teams to negotiate licensing deals with the AI agents. We've seen some of that. We've seen announcements recently in the press as well. So, Cloudflare's, we call it, we're still working on the name. Right now, we refer to it as paper crawl. It gives a vision to democratize this ability for people to, be paid for their content, to be paid for LLMs to scrape their content or to crawl their web pages. So, there are a bunch of challenges and policy considerations that we've seen. Partly one of them is that many AI crawlers are hard to identify. They don't properly self-identify or combine functions without clear disclosure. There's no comprehensive industry approach agreed upon for, publication of crawler information and identity verification. And then, there's also a lack of crawler distinction. There are some crawlers that crawl for a variety of reasons. And if they crawl your content, they're going to crawl for all three of those. And if you don't want them to crawl your content at all, then, you may be missing out on, like their search crawling, et cetera. So you're not getting the benefit just because you didn't want them to crawl for training, for example.
1 minute.
Sorry?
1 minute, please.
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that I wanted to flag is that, we published and everything that I've said, we've published on our blog. We're pretty, we're very transparent about all of this. And one of the things that we also published, I believe it was in September, was our proposed responsible crawling principles. And we came up with 5 principles. The first being that companies, so public disclosure, companies should publicly disclose the information about their bots. 2, self-identification. Bots should be truthful, self-identify with cryptographic verification to prevent spoofing. 3, declared single principle. So AI bots should have one distinct declared purpose, like either you're scraping for search or for input or for training, but only one at a time. So if you're doing multiple ones, break those up. And then respect preferences. So AI bots should respect and comply with preferences that are expressed by the website creator or website operators via robots.tdx. And then finally, that we think that bots should act with good intent. So they shouldn't flood sites with excessive traffic or engage in deceptive behavior. None of these principles are set in stone. They are, it was our opportunity to, sort of put some principles out there. We think that this is a conversation that we should have with diverse stakeholders and for people to, continue to iterate on this. So I'll stop there and pass it off to Stan, rather.
Perfect. Stan, take us home.
Hey, thanks everyone, and thanks for inviting me to speak here. While I'm remembering it, my colleague Ricky Gaines is in person in the audience there. So if you have questions about anything I say or about Wikimedia Foundation or Wikipedia, please talk to him. He is super friendly. Let me start with a little bit about Wikipedia and the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm sure you all know Wikipedia, right? It is the world's largest online encyclopedia, something like 66 million articles spread across 300 different languages, all put together by volunteers around the world. None of this, most of them don't get paid for any of it. And the project itself is also not monetize by, we do not do ads, right? That's not how we monetize the thing. It is entirely donor driven, which is where the foundation comes in. We collect the donations, keep the website online. This pays for our site reliability engineers and for our lawyers and others who sort of support the projects without getting involved in the content. All of the content on Wikipedia is subject to a Creative Commons license, the one that requires both attribution and share alike. Those are the only two conditions for the license. And so this has been sort of the intention of the volunteers and the foundation since the beginning of the project is to make all of this content freely available to everyone. And that includes for commercial purposes, such as training your AI bot. So this puts us in a slightly different position than a lot of the other websites that are either monetizing via ads or seeking to be more protective to do that data enclosure that Brenden was talking about to protect their IP rights. We are sort of actively and on a mission to give away all of this stuff to the world, right? So we're a little bit differently situated here. But that doesn't mean that there aren't impacts that we're feeling from the scraping and my three fellow panelists both laid out, or all three laid out some of the concerns there. Zaid especially got at the trade-offs between the kind of intermediation, the traffic returns that are, that Deven mentioned have dropped off, right? Like these are real things. We have put out some blogs ourselves mentioning how that extra heavy web scraping traffic has impacted us, right? And for some months in the last year or so, that has reached near DDoS levels for our own website, to the point where we are having to do rate limiting and blocking just to preserve the user experience for our human visitors. That also costs money, right? And so to some extent, our donors are subsidizing the training of these LLMs, which is not really how we're planning on spending this money in the future. So it's sort of a two-sided thing, right? The user experience, the ability of our site reliability engineers to keep the site running. But then there's also that intermediation effect that I think all three panelists have mentioned before here, right? Which is like if you can just type in your question into ChatGPT and get an answer, a lot of people don't ever click on whatever attribution or links are included in the response there, right? It's just a one-stop shop. And so you don't get the human eyeballs on your site. That's important for us, both because we do occasionally do the fundraising banners there that drive some of our donations, but it's also a source of new contributors, right? If you don't ever go to the site, you may never see that little button that says edit and decide to make your first edit, much less become a continuing volunteer. But so that's a sort of a double impact on what we call our peer production flywheel, right? Like we need people to come to the site, find the comma splice that bothers them and fix it, or find a place where there should be an article and add that thing. If people are getting the answer they want without visiting our site, then we miss out on that. So it's a slightly different interest in site visits, but it's all sort of existential for us in the same way that news publishers and others are relying on actual traffic to their sites. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of what we're doing in the face of this, given our constraints on that our content is freely licensed, right? So it's hard for us to put a big legal fence around that. We have chosen to give that away to the world. But we are nonetheless experiencing these kind of negative impacts. And so we have both our product and technology teams, but then a new team that was spun up a few years ago, the enterprise team, to sort of in tandem deal with what we call commercial reusers of content. In the web crawling space in particular, much like Cloudflare is doing, we are trying to identify who's operating these bots, what they're doing, and to the extent they are violating our robots policy. You can find that on our website. We then try to get a conversation going with them and say, hey, you're violating our rules. Please talk to our enterprise team who can tell you about the benefits of using our API instead, right? So this is a slightly different alternative to what Zaid and Cloudflare are doing, and a little bit different than I think what Brenden mentioned in terms of data enclosure, right? Like we are making our stuff open, but we do want to offer a different mechanism for acquiring that data rather than just directly scraping the website. If companies are non-responsive, we then can follow up either with additional communications or by taking action to limit their access. And so this does require things like rate limiting. This is helpful for, Zaid has already laid out why we need to know whose bots are whose and what they're doing. And so we're not accidentally rate limiting the wrong bot who might be, playing by the rules. We need to know who does what. And then in excessive cases, we will actually block access to bots as we can identify them. If they're repeat bad players here, not playing by the rules, not talking to us and causing us traffic problems, then we will occasionally take those more extreme steps. All right, that was a lot. I think I'd rather take questions than continue talking at you all.
I'll tell you have 1 minute if you want.
I think I'll leave it there. Looking forward to questions.
So I was also asked to moderate a bit. I have a couple global-ish issues for the panel and the room. Again, to me, it all does feel a little like ancient history has resurrected itself. I'm remembering the early trespass to chattel cases when in the web, and those who don't know random legalese, it was an old doctrine that just sat there molding away, and someone said, "Wow, the way you're attacking servers feels an awful like this old doctrine," and that got resurrected. And as we said, things sorted, markets did play a role. But I do want to just suggest there are a couple things that are a little bit unstated assumptions. One, that this is all commercial. So I'm curious, the real work that a lot of scientists do in NLP, et cetera, has been able to scrape in the past. So I don't know where fair use plays in, how that will work in the future if many sites say, no, you can't train, even if it's for a non-commercial purpose. I think that'll be a big challenge and probably a legal policy question going forward. And also this notion that, we can kind of align the contracts and how you use it from the previous panels and things that Milton has often talked about, but this is information. The notion that we'll be able to say, you can use my data this way. And Cloudflare helped say that. But the idea that you'll never be able to then use it again, in copyright, at least in a dark version of this, Michael Heller's book, The Gridlock Economy, talks about super property rights can shut down a lot of what we want in the balance between giving incentives to creators and markets, as well as letting a lot of stuff happen. And so I think there's a unspoken assumption that this is a really great market. And while we can have micropayments and cool things, it's not just big players doing this. So I guess my questions for the group are, a little bit, and this is not probably Cloudflare's issue. Cloudflare is saying, we're just trying to help people get to what they want. But I'm thinking about New York Times terms of service that says, you cannot use this to train. The alleged paper of record isn't going to allow us to study it. That seems wrong to me. And I don't know if there's a good answer. I'll make Brenden try. No, you don't have to, but in the sense of, what about the non-pure market aspects of this? Because this is a repository that has been
for sure,
very important.
I almost think it's case by case about the kinds of data.
Yeah.
For instance, example might be healthcare data, personal health data, right? It is obviously we all individually have very strong incentive to protect that data, but honestly, it's more valuable, socially beneficial in aggregate, right? As we can understand human genome and other aspects of it. So we have to make a trade-off here about how much we want to protect that data.
Well, and thank you for reminding us it's not just copyright, because I do feel in some IP tech conversations with lawyers, at least, it's a tail wagging a bigger dog at times when we think only about copyright. So that's a great.
And then I'll just add on that just to kind of share what's happening in the standardization effort. And I don't know if Cloudflare is participating in that or not. That would be interesting to hear about. But they are definitely struggling with a couple of issues. So defining usage categories, everyone was trying to identify different kinds of categories where they might want their data protected in a particular way. And the group has basically stepped back and really is only able to distinguish between foundation model production, search, and as we those are overlap, or those are starting to overlap to the point that you can't even distinguish between those usages.
Right.
And then also on the kind of what do you do once you have these signals about data, the compliance part. The standardization group is basically they claim that they will not obviously be enforcing anything, and that the recipient of the information may choose to respect the preferences that are being expressed, and that may be based on legal context, contractual agreements, norms, priorities, different communities' usages. And so I agree with you that the real debates are going to be kind of the next phase of policymakers get a hold of, or they understand that these capabilities exist, and then they start to implement those in policies.
Before Zaid goes, because I know
Cloudflare
have a lot to say on the standardization process, and absolutely they're involved in that. I'll say, not 100% answer to Devin's initial question here, but one of the benefits that we are seeing in having these more like partnership style relationships is that we can actually talk about what people are doing with the data, right? And that means a lot of times we can help them by providing a better service or product to them, but it also gives us a sense of like what's going on out there, right? And so that's a different kind of situation than the like arm's length semi-automated transaction that Cloudflare is doing, which granted our model probably isn't scalable at the scale that Cloudflare is operating at, right? That would be a lot of different individual conversations to have to understand what the reuser is doing with the data, what they plan to do, whether you want to do business with them at all, right? And so again, there's still some open questions for us on this end too, in terms of, we don't necessarily know what all the scrapers are doing if they're not necessarily talking to us. But we do encourage them to then come meet with us, right? Like we want to provide good quality information if we can. It's helpful to know what they're doing. Better system all around for us, with the constraints that like we can afford to do that at a sort of one-to-one, a case-by-case basis in the near term at least. But then I'll pass to Zaid to talk about like that. I'm sure that actually doesn't work when you're representing 20% of the internet.
Yeah. So, what I'd say is a couple things. One, like our goal is to find a workable balance for everyone, one that protects the integrity of, the web publishing ecosystem, but also allows for continuation of innovation in AI. And we know that this requires collaboration. And this is like collaboration from the content creators, from publishers, from right holders, from AI companies, from policymakers, people to come together to try to, agree on some workable technical standards. We are also working through IETF, not me personally, but some of our technical folks in Europe have presented and are working through sort of technical challenges. But it's a conversation. It's a start to do something. I know for like Deven, you asked about sort of like you didn't say it this way, but it's like it seems like one of your questions is sort of like, well, what is the public interest in being able to scrape something and that has nothing to do with trying to make money, et cetera, right? I know that the Center for Democracy and Technology here in Washington is planning a conversation just with the nonprofit community to think about what is our interest in this, right? Like not just the content creators, not just the LLMs, but what about, civil society? What about the nonprofit world? And I don't know that people have an answer yet. I think that people are still having those conversations and trying to figure out, what kind of stance to take. And so I think, part of our announcement and part of what we're doing is helping to force the conversation and help to create a workable balance for everyone.
Questions in the audience? Peter.
Hi. So I'm trained as a lawyer, and if somebody does unauthorized access to my website and causes $10,000 in damage, there's the convenient law called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and there's criminal penalties also. And under the International Convention, the Budapest Convention, these same laws exist in most of the other democratic, free market countries. So why haven't we been hearing about the threat of computer fraud and abuse actions against deceptive bots that have unauthorized access after they've been notified that they're on the site contrary to the site's wishes?
I'm happy to take a stab at that, although there may be people more expert than me in this room or online. I think part of it is that the jurisprudence around CFAA claims is still a bit murky, even though the Supreme Court claimed to have cleared it up, a few years ago. They kind of didn't. And what counts as a either restriction on access or a breach of that restriction is still a bit murky too. And so I think, the people bringing claims have felt stronger on the copyright front than on the CFAA front. I don't know if that fully explains the sort of legal decisions there, but I think that may be part of it.
Peter, does that count for just the sort of DDoS stuff where?
So there was a Supreme Court case that roughly said violating a terms of service is not a violation. If you violate a technical gate, it is a violation.
Okay.
And so just saying we have a terms of service would not be probably a strong enough claim. But if some company like Cloudflare had any technical thing that had to be broken or evaded, then that probably would imply would be enough to do a CFAA claim. Seems to me. I haven't researched this topic ever, but I've taught CFAA for years, and it seems like it wouldn't be that hard to configure your website to have a technical barrier to unwanted scraping. And if that were the case, the damages provisions are very favorable to plaintiffs, and these defendants are identifiable and have a lot of money. So it seems like a nice time to sue if you can show damages.
So Peter, would probably an API be enough of a technical, we're guessing, enough of a technical barrier compared to robots.txt, which is sort of a polite request?
I don't know enough about how the API works to tell you that, but find a technical barrier, give notice to the people who are coming in that you don't want coming in, and I think you have a CFAA claim.
Zaid, do you want to wade into that, or are you going to just say, no, I'm not here?
No, I mean, well, while I have a law degree and did practice law for a little while, I pay my bar dues. I don't really practice law anymore. I'm not sure why I pay my bar dues still. But I will, and so I can't really speak to the to the legal part of it, because I don't follow the legal cases as closely, other than to know that there are dozens of legal cases against the LLMs for the scraping that they're doing. And I know that that's different kind of than the question that was asked, but like there are cases that are lots of cases that are out there.
What I was saying, Zaid, is what about Cloudflare's has been very interesting from what you've described about technical approaches to access. That, I think what Peter's describing might fit some of what you all are doing, but maybe again, that's a little more technical than is your bailiwick.
Well, I'm not sure that we have gotten to a place or that we have an example of, somebody using Cloudflare to block a crawler or a scraper, and that then they do it anyway and are taking that content. I'm not sure that I don't know the answer to that, right? Like, and that's kind of how I understood the question was, if you're telling people not to scrape and they do it anyway, don't you then have a claim? From the tools that we put in place in July, I don't know the answer to whether or not we have set up the technical mechanism to prevent people from scraping and they did it anyway. My understanding is that we are effectively blocking them from scraping and that they're not able to do that. What I will also say, and I mentioned this in our prep call, is that there was this interesting article in The Atlantic about Common Crawl, and which is obviously a nonprofit. They're not, making money, but they have been asked over and over again by publishers not to scrape their content, their paywalled content. In some cases, they've replied and said, okay, we won't do it. But they are continuing to do it. And so there's a problem there. But the question about whether or not, bots not respecting, Cloudflare's, the tools that we've put in place, I don't know the technical answer to whether or not that has happened. But yeah, so I'll say that.
Other questions from the floor? Well, actually, for maybe all three of you, but certainly our virtual guests, a follow-up paper that Mark Riedel and I just placed looks at the law of agency and borrows from it to talk, and it may be of interest to you all. It actually lines up, I think, Zaid, with some of what you're saying about usually you have to disclose in human agency relationship, or you're encouraged to, is really a better way to put it, who the principal is. So in a way, for those interested in this sort of argument, I think there is something there about when you keep knocking on someone's door using AI as an agent, the third party should get to know who you are and what you're up to, because that allows for a negotiation. So we actually are a bit in line with some of what you all are talking about. Is another aspect of the market is depending on what it's going on and what you're doing, the more any of these companies enable that ability to understand, right? So if you're at Wikimedia saying, oh, okay, well, we recognize you, that's good, we're going to let you do certain things. Or if you're a Cloudflare client being able to do that, it would arguably enable better markets, right? Because you no longer have this, I don't know what that bot is and what it's doing. So I think that might fit some of what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, it does. So I kind of come back to this, can't remember who mentioned it, but just kind of the heterogeneity of kind of making rules in this space, right? And how, I guess I'm curious, like, can Cloudflare create a system that would actually scale up and allow the kind of robust, diverse governance interactions between data suppliers and data requesters, and for like.
I mean, I think that's our goal, right? But but everyone's not a Cloudflare user, so you have, and while 20% of the internet sitting behind us is still, a lot. There's a lot there are a lot of websites and customers and content, creators out there who are not our customers, and so we're not able to impact, their particular, like, non, Cloudflare customers. And the overwhelming majority, like millions of our customers, are free customers. They're not paying us for the services that we provide them. And so, like, what we are doing, it will only impact Cloudflare customers. It's not going to impact everyone, but it is a way to impact the market and to impact the way that bots behave, the way that LLMs behave. And so this is like, we're looking for a workable balance. And this is part of the conversation that we're having right now. And as we were working on this, this product and this announcement, we had conversations with all of the well-known, entities that you can think of out there, and wanted to be in a place where there was agreement. This wasn't launched as an attack against any particular company, but instead it was like, we have done, research for the past 18 months on this issue. We see that this is a problem. We want to come to a solution. Please come work with us.
Great. On that note, we want to make sure that Milton do a last few minutes. So I will say, if you have further, please reach out to folks, and thank you, panel.
Well, I think it's great to have the kind of participation we had. Particularly, very glad that the Wikimedia and Cloudflare showed up. We have some really interesting attendees from the semiconductor industry. And I think you can get a sense of when we talk about AI governance that it's not just this sort of vague, dreamy idea that somehow society as a whole can make the technology good. It's focused on very particular issues. How do you protect online content? When should you and when shouldn't you? What's open and what's closed? Can you control other countries' development of digital technology? These are the very specific issues that I think when we talk about AI governance, we have to consider, and we're trying to make a contribution to that. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we look forward to continued discussions. By the way, we do have some papers out there on the ransom where you could just pick them up, but they're also open access online, perhaps being scanned by bots even as it's happening.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.